on this week of the DNC. I'm reluctant to start with Trump, but just because you are the dean of Trumpology, I will ask you if you saw him try to explain the comments he made about the Congressional Medal of Honor versus the. I wonder if you can speak to that entire mess that he stepped into.
Well, I did not see the interview on that, but I saw his original comments about it. And in fact, went and looked him up on the internet to make sure that I heard them correctly, because they're just cockamamie nonsense. Donald, I mean, this goes to a fundamental truth about Donald. He doesn't know anything. And this is part of the thing that brought it through. And why did he speak so highly of the widow Adelson, whose husband, whom I knew a little bit, was this multi-billionaire casino magnate? The Adelsons had his and her jumbo 747s as their personal jet.
I didn't know that. That's
his and
wild.
her 747s. Hers was ruined in a curious and inexplicable accident that allowed them to collect the insurance for the plane when it was about to undergo some big renovations and updates. The Donald's idea of an award is so cockamamie. You may remember that some admiring old man who'd gotten a Purple Heart gave it to Donald, and Donald said, "Oh, he always wanted one of these."
That's
he
right.
has the concept of what those are about, except, oh, it's an award. And remember, he keeps telling everybody that he's this champion golfer who's won, 22 golf championships, all at his own clubs. And there is, if folks want to go look for it, a video shot recently in which by a pro who was playing with him, he misses by a lot, shot after shot after shot on the putting green. He's not a champion golfer any more than he's, the greatest genius of all time and the world's greatest expert on taxes and the world's greatest expert on, I think it's 21 other subjects. It's just all fraud, top to bottom. And if you don't understand things like duty and honor and valor, then you end up doing what Donald does.
He was talking about the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which he gave, as you say, to these wealthy donors, the Adelsons. Sheldon Adelson has passed away. Now his wife is there, and she continues to be a supporter. And when I say supporter, I mean writing huge checks to support Donald Trump. And so as he was acknowledging her, he said, this, again, Presidential Medal of Freedom that honors civilians is, and he used the words, quote, much better than the Medal of Honor given to service members. I mean, it is, it's almost grotesque.
He also made the comment about the people who get the Medal of Honor, they're either dead or they've been hit so many times with bullets that they look awful.
Yeah,
It has nothing to do with why we honor some people for their extraordinary bravery on a battlefield.
Sure. And John Kelly, who is his, I think, the longest chief of staff to serve with Trump, the retired Marine general, just, recoiled at this. And of course, he said, think of Normandy, Iwo Jima, Vietnam, or Fallujah. The Medal of Honor is earned. It's not won, it's earned. Yeah.
What? Iwo Jima, Fallujah? What?
It's remarkable, though, David, that through all of this, somehow he does have the support of a lot of the military. Maybe you can help me distinguish the part of the military that he gets support from. Maybe it's more the young guys who don't really look at this stuff, or what is it? The macho?
A part of it appears to be this creation of a false image that he's a tough guy, because he's not. He's a pussycat. But beyond that, I continue to be mystified. I mean, I understand why people support Donald if they're racists, even if they don't realize they're racist. It makes perfect sense. That's easy to identify. And I can understand people who do not understand anything about why their economics are not what they would like, especially if they're in the bottom half or 2/3 of the country, and they believe his rhetoric because they don't know that it's actually harmful to them. The policies he's done are harmful to him. But I really have a very hard time understanding how people, once they know he's basically been a criminal his whole life. He's been found to be a rapist. There are 24 women who say he raped them, convicted of felonies, serving liquor to 12, 13, and 14-year-old children, as I describe in my 1992 book, The Trump's a little less than half of it, and my biography of him, The Making of Donald Trump, and other just what should be disqualifying activities to be on a local town council. They still embrace him. And it says that our political system is based on Enlightenment era principles of rational debate about the best available information. And the concerns of the framers of our Constitution were that the mob, as some of them referred to it, the rabble, would be subject to emotional manipulation. And this appears to be what's happened here. We have a large segment of people in America who slept through junior high school civics, who don't understand how the world works, basically. And they see him as their champion who will stand up for them, even though the few things he actually did in office were contrary to their interests. And of course, that's why I suspect Donald always says of the poorly educated, I love you. We love you. We love the poorly educated. Yeah, because then you don't understand what he's really doing.
Well, when we speak of populism and the tremendous success that he had in 2016 as sort of this populist candidate, I was saying before, in watching the DNC, the idea somehow, and there was Kamala Harris's friend and her mom who spoke for a bit. And I thought that worked just because it spoke to her background, where she's come from. She comes from the middle class. She is the middle class. And so her ability to connect with the middle class, you would think, would be greater than this billionaire guy who essentially has done nothing but take advantage of the middle class.
Well, they did a very good job last night of introducing her and telling about who she was, and particularly how she effectively rescued her schoolmate who was being raped by her father-in-law and got her moved into her house. They went on in a number of the talks way too long. Biden should not have gone on 11 p.m. at night, but much earlier he gave quite a good speech for someone who is departing the stage. But a lot of people won't see it that way. They won't see it that way partly because of the color of her skin, partly because they'll say, well, she's a radical. You know, she went to demonstrations as a young person, as if there's something wrong with that. Our Constitution explicitly enshrines the right to protest and complain. And in fact, I've said throughout my career that it's the duty of Americans to criticize their government. After all, it's our government. It's not, King George's government. It's ours. And it's a fiction we create for our benefit. And of course, we should be criticizing it. The job of the President of the United States, in significant part, is to be criticized.
Yeah, I mean, you'd think that activism would be celebrated on some level, but, everything now is weaponized in one way or another.
And all day today, Mark, I've been getting tweets, emails sent to me, texts, things like that, about she is the most far-left radical of all times. Her economic plan will destroy America. Donald said that, so they're just parroting it, but we don't know what her economic plan is. Right. She's indicated she supports the fundamentals of what Biden's been doing, which is investing taxpayer money in those things that will create jobs and bring jobs home from offshore, which they've been very successful at so far, and they're just getting going.
Yeah, and I think it's actually politically clever not to get into too many specifics yet. I actually think her campaign has done a really good job of managing the moment, managing the enthusiasm, playing it, drafting, if you will, that, the slipstream of enthusiasm. And then, when you come out against price gouging, this kind of thing, price gouging actually lands with the American public, even though there's a technical explanation or a technical term gouging refers to. When you get nailed by Ticketmaster and the airlines for baggage fees and for all the add-ons, these are the things that I think American people feel like, hey, I was gouged on this. They're taking advantage of their leverage. So I really liked that play.
And if you just pay attention to the hourly 2-minute newscast on a radio station while you're commuting to or from work, One of the things you know is that all sorts of companies are reporting huge profits out of line with the past. They are saying we can't afford workers. In a few cases, they're laying off thousands of workers, but they're spending money to buy back their own stock. And this is because the system is encouraging this kind of greed. And that's what it is. I mean, if you once you have about $300 million in this country, which means you can have your own private jet and you can have a pretty good sized yacht, there isn't anything else money can buy you. And yet there are people who they're like Donald, who, their claim of wealth is who they are. It's not about the substance of what they have done. Martin Luther King Jr. in the March on Washington, which Donald says he got as big an audience, bigger than Martin Luther King, of course, said that we should be judged by the content of our character. Donald is part of a whole movement that's been around now since the 80s, in which we judge people by the contents or presumed contents, in Donald's case, of their wallet. That's not a measure of anything.
It's odd, again, that this guy who has those values, and actually those values are played out in virtually everything that he's done in his life, has, again, this popular appeal. But that seems to be waning. Now, David, what about the politics of the moment? That he does seem to be losing tremendous momentum. He's not the new kid, the new shiny object anymore. Kamala Harris is the new shiny object, really. And the press, you can argue, is treating her that way. What do you see happening short term and over the next few months with Trump?
Well, absolutely. Donald has spent so much time reinforcing his ties to his base and not building a coalition. And that's what you do to win elections, is here's a group of people support me. Now, how do I get more people to support me? And Donald has no capacity to do that. So you're seeing the diehard Trumpers stick with him. I'm not sure that she's been treated lightly. I mean, I've read a great deal about her. Certainly the New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, a couple of other papers have had serious pieces examining, her career. She benefits primarily, I think, from relieving people of Trump fatigue. This constant doom and gloom, and America's in the toilet and it's terrible and all of that. First of all, who goes around saying that about their country who wants to be president? If there's a problem, you point to the problem and say it doesn't equal our greatness. But
it worked for him, to be fair. It worked for him in 2016. I think he's playing the hit still.
Yes, it did. But this isn't 2016.
Right.
It might be, as some people are observing, 2008 again. But Harris provides people who were just can't stand Joe Biden for some reason, with a way to move away from Trump. But the most important thing she's doing is getting people who probably were not going to vote to turn out and to donate. The amount of money that she's raising from small donors is just extraordinary. We've got well over 1 million people now who there's no record of them ever donating. Every time you donate to a campaign, the political consultants, in addition to the government records, gather all this information. And they can look up right away, well, who did Mark Thompson give to in what years on what issues in their databases. So this enormous outpouring of support that we haven't seen before is, I think, indicative of people saying, let's move on. Let's talk about our future, not about our past. I think that can be a very winning argument. And I think if the Democrats do this right, they can control the House, the Senate, and the White House. And if they do, even if it's with a 1-vote margin in the Senate and a 5-vote margin in the House, or I think they'll do much better than that in the House, they better have a game to really act quickly, to pass a series of laws, protect reproductive rights, to invest further in education and infrastructure, to overturn this cockamamie Supreme Court decision that president is immune.
David, just to follow up on that, they could do that legislatively, and it would take precedent legally over the Supreme Court decision? That is to
Well,
say,
it depends on exactly the issue and how it's framed.
okay.
Some things don't require constitutional amendments. For example, as I've long advocated, expanding the Supreme Court from 9 to 15, because there are 15 subordinate courts that are supervised. That's the reason for the logic of that number. That's simply an act of Congress. And then unless you're really dumb, you appoint centrist judges known for their scholarship. People have the kind of deep, super deep knowledge that we see in Ketanji Jackson Brown, the newest justice. And not people who will turn out to be like, if you're old enough to remember, William O. Douglas, one of the most liberal members of the court ever. And they're certainly not going to, under a Kamala Harris presidency, going to appoint right-wingers. But people who are, who have a clear scholarship and not an agenda, which is what the Federalist Society has given us, is 6 members of the Supreme Court who have a political agenda and are using the court to advance their political agenda. So there are a number of things they can do, and I think it'll be very important for them to act and act quickly. But for the rest of this campaign, you're going to see fairly limited, probably, details about what my plan is. I mean, it's one of the things that hurt Hillary Clinton in 2016, as I mentioned on your show before. I have a 97-point plan and blah, 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 footnote 15. And it just doesn't sell. You got to be much more visceral. And she's out selling, we can have a better future. We can get past this period. We can make the economy continue to grow. That's a winning message if people believe it.
Yeah, I have been saying it since the beginning. The people who are pounding on her for policy and the people who are pounding on her for a sit-down interview are people who do sit-down interviews for a living and people who parse policy for a living because it's the punditry. The public, as you suggested, they vote on gut. And she has caught something. It's a combination of these things that you speak of, a hope for the future, not living in the past. And she's been smart enough, when I say she, her and her team, to assemble a strategy in a short time to speak to that. Boy, if they took both Senate and House, ran the table, that would be extraordinary. And then you'd need to suspend the filibuster to do some of the things that you're speaking of. Yeah,
well, filibuster rules used to be that you had to stand there like Jimmy Stewart in the movie Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and hold the floor. The rules are now you just announce you're going to do that. Now your filibuster blocks discussion of a bill. We're going to keep the filibuster. Let's go back to the old rules where you had to put up. The issue I think can do very well for Kamala Harris is her pointing out how Donald Trump wants not only another huge tax cut for the rich and corporations, the one we have right now we're financing with borrowed money. The deficit we have right now, the annual budget deficit, which has been coming down, would come down about a quarter in size if we weren't borrowing money so that people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and big corporations don't have to pay as much or anything in taxes under the Trump rules. And bringing back the child tax credit at the level we had during the pandemic, it lifted half of poor children out of poverty. We're the only modern country. There are basically 34 modern countries, 36, depending on how you want to count them. We're the only one of them that doesn't have subsidies for children. I don't generally like subsidies. My book, Free Lunch, is exposing corporate subsidies that were hidden until I wrote about them. And people didn't know that, Walmart builds its distribution centers and a lot of its stores with your tax dollars, not with their investors' dollars. Guess how wonderfully profitable that makes them. But we're the only major country that is not doing things to help parents. And there's very good research by a professor at the University of Chicago's Booth School. That's a business school. It is a school well known for its right-wing tilt. And I went to the University of Chicago for a couple of quarters long ago, where he shows that for every dollar we invest in a child from conception through about 6 months, you get a lifetime compounded return of 7%. You got an investment you know will always make 7%. Go buy it and put all your money in it. And by the time you're my age, you'll be well off.
Sure.
We need to be investing in our children. We shouldn't be underpaying school teachers and getting rid of arts and music and drama so that we can cut school spending in this country, or we're going to fall behind the rest of the world. And Kamala Harris is a product of two professors, right? Two. Her mother's dead now. Her mother was a sociologist. And her father, who is a full professor at Stanford University. Not exactly an easy place to get hired at. And she grew up in this household where, in addition to standing up for people without power, rescuing that girl from the raping stepfather, she also understood that knowledge is crucial to economic growth in the world we live in today. This wasn't so true 1,000 years ago, but it's certainly true now. And we got to end this period of disrespecting education.
Yeah, I love that you said this, because the way science has been disrespected, expertise has been disrespected. We point to these universities that if Harvard came by and said, hey, you know what, we're going to give your child a full scholarship to our university, you'll go, great. I mean, you wouldn't go, oh my God, those elite East Coast universities, I don't want my child to go to Harvard, or whatever. I mean, these are increasingly, we could get into higher education and a conversation about that, David. I'd love to have it with you now that you're a professor in Rochester. But I'm also, and you've had so many various involvements in higher education along the way. But my point is simply, I love that you mentioned that maybe we get back to really trying to educate our populace. I mean, it's crazy that we don't.
And being demanding as to what you learn in an rounded way. One of the things I love about Rochester Institute of Technology, which is number 3 in the number of STEM graduates it produces. I mean, it's like MIT or Caltech or Rensselaer. It's a school for scientists, engineers. You have to take a full load of liberal arts education. You have to learn literature. The journalism students that I'll teach in some of my classes, I don't expect them to become journalists, but the skills that you can learn in journalism, how to find facts, how to check those facts, how to tell them in a concise and precise manner, those are useful in any career. And one of the things I'm most happy about at RIT is this tradition that, yeah, you're going to learn arts. RIT has a huge dance program, for example, and all sorts of art programs, textile art, because it complements the kind of education. If you turn out people who simply went to medical school or engineering school and have no broader understanding of the world, you're shortchanging the student and you're shortchanging the society.
So well said. I saw a comment, and I wanted to get your comment on the comment. This is from Wes, who says, so to me, it's not her politics. I'm socially liberal, but kind of fiscally conservative, but the threat to our democracy is greater than political views. Thank you, Wes, for that. He's talking about Kamala Harris, obviously. Yeah. There are a couple of things going on here. One is the completely flawed notion that the GOP is better with the economy and on things that involve economics than are the Democrats. It's an utter...
And all the data, I've written innumerable pieces where I've gone back and analyzed job creation, GDP growth, real wage growth, that is wages adjusted for inflation. And every time you have a Democrat in the White House, the performance is better. And we wouldn't expect that. Why would the stock market do better with a Democrat in the White House than a Republican? Well, because when we all prosper, when the largest share of us is getting better off, then people who own businesses can sell more goods and services. And that's so obvious. I don't understand why a lot of people don't grasp that.
It's
you know,
effective
Joe Biden
branding,
has
David, I would say. I mean, the Republicans have effectively branded themselves as fiscally responsible when they've actually been fiscally irresponsible.
Yes, and I think that's starting to come apart. I mean, one of the things Kamala Harris has done is take back the notion of who's the party promoting freedom. A party that wants to invade your doctor's office, wants to invade your body, a party that wants to tell you who you can and can't associate with, that's not a party of freedom. And she's very good about this. I mean, the 20 years she spent as a grade prosecutor, whatever case, got handed to her when she came to work, you're going to prosecute this or that felony. They're serving her very well in this election because she learned how you get 12 people to vote to convict, which is, not a light thing to do. Jurors, it's very clear from lots of research that's been done, jurors take their responsibilities seriously as long as they know that the court system is serious.
Yeah, and I think that also implicit in that is the messaging that you need to do to a jury. You need to hone your message, make it concise and powerful in order to get that conviction to which you referred, right?
Yeah. Whichever side educates the jury generally gets the outcome that they want, and the side that reacts doesn't. And what you're seeing in this election right now is Donald is having to be reactive to Kamala Harris. That alone is a very good sign that she's doing well. The polls are showing people are moving towards her, and a lot of that movement is people who weren't going to vote or people who just want to be past the Donald era. They're not thinking deeply about saving democracy. It's just like, gee, do I have to hear him whine anymore?
Well, thank you, because that was my second point about Wes's comment. The threat to our democracy is greater than political views. That's something that Biden was pushing when he was a candidate, and I always felt it was a bad thing to push. I'm not saying it's not true. There is a threat to democracy, no question about it, but I felt it was some amorphous thing that people weren't really getting. It's not. It doesn't land like pocketbook issues and like a real populist argument.
It's too, to use a phrase from my youth, pointy-headed. It does not get to people's feelings and what affects them in their everyday lives. I mean, after all, we don't want most people to spend their lives focused on what they think about the political movement any more than we want most people to spend their lives focused on crabgrass in their lawns. You want to have a broad set of experiences and tastes, and the diversity of our knowledge and our viewpoints. That's a strength, not a weakness, contrary to what Donald thinks. And in the case of this election and the other two Donald was in, yes, there's a real serious threat to democracy, especially this time around, because people who support him saw what he didn't achieve in his 4 years and have this plan, Project 2025, which I, by the way, encourage people to go through, Mark. It is, you can download it and search it.
I mean, it's 900 pages, David. Most people are not going to go through it. Have you seen a good summary of it? I've seen a bunch of summaries. I need to post some of them here. Probably.
I have, but I'll give you one good example of how deceptive it is. They say that, they're not proposing, despite public comments on videotape, to make contraception illegal. Well, what the report says is that contraceptives cannot be shipped by common carrier. And my guess is 20% of Americans know what that means and 80% don't. Let me tell you what it means. So Mark Thompson goes into the contraceptives business. You're selling IUDs and condoms and pills. So long as you have your own fleet of trucks from your factories to the doctor's offices and the drugstores, you can ship your product. But you can't call up one of the big trucking companies like Schneider and say, oh, by the way, we got a quarter truckload for you today. That's a common carrier. This is the kind of deceptive use of information that all the way through I see in Project 2025. And Trump should not be allowed to run away from this whatsoever. He endorsed it at the start. He said, these are my people. This is going to be our plan. And now he goes around saying, I have no idea what it's about. By the way, there are parts of it I like and parts I don't. Well, if you don't know what it's about, how can you know that?
Well, the other thing is the leaked ProPublica stuff, the videos where they, one after another, identify themselves as former members of the Trump White House, it's
Right.
laughable. I mean, everybody comes out of Trump land who's involved in Project 2025. And I just want to go back. You're suggesting that in Project 2025, there are all these loopholes by which they take away your freedoms, like contraceptive freedoms, et cetera.
They'll
They
tell
don't.
you they're not doing it, and then the practical application of their policies would take that away from you. And, the reason we created this country was to choose our own destiny. We make mistakes, we live with those mistakes. But we choose, not King George and his descendants in London, and not Donald Trump as a dictator. We choose by the people we elect. And bit by bit, unevenly, we have been expanding the freedoms of people. The purpose of our Constitution is to see what happens if we ennoble the human spirit and set it free. What can we achieve? What can we achieve in arts, in politics, in philosophy, in building an economy that reduces suffering and that makes for broad prosperity? What can we do? And the world is so complex, we're never going to get it exactly optimal. But the path has been in the direction of more and more freedom. Nothing terrifies the Republican Party more than more individual freedom, even though they branded themselves as the party of freedom. And in this election, you're going to see that really challenged by Kamala Harris because of things like wanting to control reproductive rights. By the way, a strategy I just don't see as a winner for anybody under the age of about 45.
Well, that's the other thing that the new campaign, and we'll finish up here our last minute with David K. Johnston, but the idea somehow that there's anything that would appeal to this younger generation, this younger demographic that seems to be coming forward, there's nothing that I can see in this Trump world that would really appeal to them.
Yeah, more. Well, listen, if you want to go into debt to get a college education, if you want to reduce taxpayer funding on public schools, these are good policies for you, and you should vote for Trump if that's the case. Most important thing for young people to do is turn out to vote. When I turned 18 in the 1960s, I couldn't vote until I was 22 because of the way the timing of lowering the voting age to 18
worked. Yeah.
And after the first initial spurt, voting among people 18 to 24 fell off radically. It's come back in the last couple of elections, and hopefully will come back very large in this election, getting people turn out. By the way, the one thing I hope you and the audience watch is the Supreme Court has a case before it on whether about 40,000 Arizonans should be not allowed to vote. They followed the rules, but the state had a separate rule about ID. If you're Native American, you probably don't have a birth certificate. Many Native Americans who live on tribal lands do not have birth certificates. If you were a soldier serving overseas, how are you going to get your birth certificate? And the Republicans want to throw out these votes. Now, we don't know if the votes are going to be for Republicans or for Democrats, although clearly they wouldn't bring the case unless they thought this would hurt the Democrats. And we should pay attention to how the Supreme Court acts, because we should be expanding the voting franchise, not shrinking it. Now, this is about a federal election. In a federal election, you have to be a citizen to vote. And we can challenge you, we can prosecute you if you're not a citizen and you voted. In local elections, that doesn't apply. For example, in my school district, and I live in what was, in recent years, the highest property tax rate jurisdiction in the entire United States. We have school board budget votes every year. You don't have to be a citizen to vote in those elections. You just have to live in the school district, because this is not about governance. It's about spending your money. Same thing in water districts. When I was a farm boy in Orange County, my grandmother got to vote. She was a citizen, but even if she wasn't, she got X number of votes based on how many acres of oranges she had on the water board policies. And the effort to shrink the franchise, to deny people their vote, is central to what the Republicans are doing. And the message you should get from that is very simple. We know we can't win in the marketplace of ideas.
Well, they cannot survive a legit election. They just can't. I mean, if everybody voted, but that's what, to your point, that's why voter turnout is so critical. And that's why voter disenfranchisement is such a massively important thing. We had last week somebody on here who is running for Georgia, the congressional seat in the 7th district in Georgia. And we talked a completely unbridled conversation about just this thing. I mean, they have it. It's high art in Georgia, as you know, to the disenfranchisement of voters. Stacey Abrams can speak to that firsthand. But it's the other trick they have up their sleeve, because otherwise they will lose these elections, state after state and seat after seat.
Yeah. If you want to win elections, come up with what excites people, interests people, and serves their interests. And telling voters, we want you to endure larger budget deficits so that billionaires and centimillionaires can pay less in taxes and big corporations can pay less in taxes, shouldn't be a winning strategy. If it is, it's because people don't understand economics and public finance.
We'll wrap up, except to just say, you're watching this convention. The way these conventions are taken in now, David, is so different. You know, there's the TikTok, Instagram world that sort of reconstitutes everything, and you see it in much smaller ways. I think that plays, I don't know if it plays into one favor or another, but I know that there are hundreds of TikTokers, I know this is a weird thing to consider, but at the convention for the Democrats handling social media. So I think both parties are trying to, and I know because it's this week and they're doing their convention, the Democrats are really on this. So it'll be interesting to see how this kind of all shakes out that way.
Well, you know, every year we have new issues and new challenges. We're going to face other issues that you can see coming, but they're not here yet. I mean, one of them is going to be what happens when we have, as I teach my law students, capital D, capital G, designer genes. Right. And you want to pick what your child's going to look like instead of letting nature do it for you.
Oh, my God.
That will present legal challenges that will keep lawyers employed for many, many decades.
Yeah, isn't that true? I was trying to find, I've got so many comments about you and your writings, and I'll have them better together next time. But I love that people are going and reading your stuff, because the books you've written on Trump, and there it is, The Making of Donald Trump, and the must-reads by David K. Johnston, the Trump trilogy. But truly, the stories come right out of the chute from page one. And yeah,
Can I just leave you with one thought?
Please.
For people to, Donald this week said he's better looking than Kamala Harris. 78-year-old man compared to a 61-year-old woman, just for starters. Second, why? How misogynistic? But third, what more do you need to know about what a petty little man Donald is than he thinks that matters?
So you're saying he's not your type. Is that what you're telling me, David? Love our time together. We'll see you next week. Thank you. David K. Johnston, everybody, co-founder of DC Report and Pulitzer Prize winner. Love spending time talking to David. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.